And good evening, everybody. Here we are. It's the third Tuesday of the month, and I'm here with Deborah and Kathryn. How you ladies doing tonight?
Wonderful, Matthew. How about you?
Doing great. So excited to be here. It's always a pleasure when I get together with y'all and we bring in such a special guest. So a little bit about myself before we go. We're all going to introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Matthew Currin. I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I am have a degree in counseling. I have a platform named Convene Communities, and I'm just so lucky to do this podcast with just two wonderful ladies and have our special guest Carlton on. And so, yeah, that's me. And how about you, Deborah?
Okay, I'm Deborah King. I have a master's degree in mental health and counseling also, and a doctorate in philosophy. I am the president, founder, and CEO of It Takes a Life to Save a Life. And I am involved in several organizations here in Ashtabula County. Kathryn?
So I'm Kathryn Whittington. I'm one of the county commissioners here in Ashtabula County, Ohio. I am the board president this year, so I will be leading the board in our endeavors throughout the year regarding different projects and things like that that are happening in the community. But before we start, we've had an outpour of people coming to us since the podcast has started, and what I would like to talk very briefly tonight, I want to just start out with, this podcast was started for the purpose to make sure that we were reaching people and letting them know that they were not alone. And right now with COVID and so many people struggling with mental health issues along with drug addiction, I really want to put out the crisis text line. So you can text 4HOPE to 741-741, or you can call the national hotline, which is the lifeline for suicide prevention and mental health, 1-800-273-8255. I think it's really important that we let our listeners know that they're not alone. We are here. If you someone, those are the numbers to contact. Also, feel free to reach out to any of us on the podcast, and we will connect you wherever you are with your local resources. So please remember, you are not alone. And with that, I would like to introduce our very special guest tonight. We have Carlton Hall. He is the CEO of Carlton Hall Consulting. And I'm going to let Carlton tell us about himself, because I could talk about Carlton all night long.
Oh, well, thank you both. Thank you all, actually. It's wonderful to be here with you. Kathryn and I are old friends, and she put out a call and asked, and anytime she asks, you gotta say yes. And so we are here, but we're here as an opportunity to share things that I'm passionate about. My name is Carlton Hall, as you mentioned. I have a consulting firm that bears my name, so I didn't have to remember what my company is called, and that's the reason why it's called that. But more than that, I've had the extraordinary privilege of, for the past more than 2 decades, 25 plus years, of working in the field of substance misuse prevention at the various levels of our helping services. So at the federal level, at the state level, at the local levels, we've been able to be a great support to those helping systems throughout the nation. I've had the extraordinary privilege of learning from some of the leading thinkers in our nation, and working with many of them in implementing some of their best practices across the nation, being able to do so in practically every state in the union and even internationally, and taking all of that experience and all of that breadth of relationships and understanding of this thing called prevention. What we've done in our company is to try to bring that information to bear to be able to help communities and preventionists throughout the nation and internationally kind of get smarter faster about prevention, think better and more critically about how to address some of the pressing issues and challenges in their community, become better community problem solvers is really what we're really all about. And so I work with some of the best subject matter experts in our field. I have the privilege of having those relationships with folks that are like-minded around this and being able to bring that breadth of resources for communities that are seeking to bring about positive change. So that's kind of what I have been doing kind of professionally. Outside of that, I am a husband and a father and a grandfather, and that takes over all of my world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I think it's really cool that you talk about being a preventionist, right? That's not a term that I don't think that term gets thrown around too much, right? You know, if you talk about what we do as counselors, in a lot of sense, we're reactive. We're waiting till after the person is having, not in all cases, but we're waiting till after the person has the issue. So just kind of expand on that, preventionist, what, you know, really kind of what that is. And speaking of friends around the world, Amy Ronshausen is watching from Drug Free America. So big shout out to Amy. We all love Amy. So yeah, so talk about that real quick, Carlton.
Amy is one of our heroes and a remarkable resource to the country. So I'm grateful to have her kind of check us out. A preventionist is a term that I think is being utilized more and more these days for those in the field that I work in most often. But I like to use it because it really sets apart those of us who believe a certain thing in a certain way. And what I like to say is that preventionists believe in three things. The first is that we believe that the best way to solve a problem is to prevent that problem from starting in the first place. The second is that we believe in the full engagement and empowerment of the community in both understanding that problem and issue and being a part in contributing to solving the problem. And last, we believe in being guided by science in order to address those issues, to achieve change at the population level. So when I think of a, and I use the term preventionist, I'm talking about a very specific set of skills, knowledge area, and the application of those skills in order to produce change. Particularly in my case, I do a lot of attending to substance misuse and the challenges associated with substance misuse and how to mitigate those issues and challenges at the individual level, but also at the community level, and therefore at the population level.
Yeah. Ladies, you have a question?
So Carlton, when we first met,
Uh-huh.
conversation we had was revolving around changing the conversation, which is the title of tonight's program. So I want you to talk to us about that conversation and how that goes and where do we go? How do we change that conversation? And when you're talking about it, I know that when you had spoken to me about it, I took it away and I thought about it for several days and what did that mean in the work that I was doing for our community? How was I going to change the conversation? And once I really realized that for me, changing the conversation was actually changing the approach to the community and the education that I was bringing to the table to talk to our families about and what we could do. And so I would like you just to explain to the group and to our listeners how you approach changing that conversation and what conversations have you been changing?
Thanks. I appreciate the question. And I really appreciate the opportunity kind of to speak with your audience, because I really do believe that this is an important conversation to have these days, and probably one of the most important conversations that I'm involved in, quite frankly. Our country is going through a great deal, to say the very least, around a whole host of challenges and issues, and that we're all kind of wrestling with. In fact, as I mentioned to Matt before we began to broadcast, I'm out here. I'm actually working with and helping and supporting my father, who was stricken by COVID, but fortunately is on the other side, recovering from it and recouping, but has a little bit of ways to go. So we're providing some additional help and support to him. We've been dealing with a lot as a nation. But before the pandemic hit, we were already dealing with so many issues. Folks may recall that it wasn't too long ago where the major news stories was around the opioid crisis that was plaguing our country, right? We were devastated by the number of overdoses that were really ruining and damaging families and communities across our nation, and in a way that has spiked recent years. And part of what it is that I really want to show and put a little bit of a magnifying glass to for our viewers and listeners is that the pandemic has served to exacerbate some of those issues and some of those challenges, even though we're not necessarily having those same conversations at that same level, because the pandemic has been really challenging us, because we've been so focused on some of those public health issues. And so part of what it is that I'm trying to help communities to understand and to participate in is the need to engage in the thinking that's required in order to continue to address and mitigate some of these very, very devastating issues that haven't gone away. In fact, that they're actually rising, right? So overdoses, unfortunately, nationally, are beginning to creep up again, even though we began to deal with that. We have more than 59 million Americans who are dealing with some form of substance use disorder or mental health disorder, either or both, right? And as a result of that, there's a whole swath of our country, a swath of our community, a swath of our citizenry, who really require the engagement and the involvement of our entire communities in that conversation. And I think part of what I see as our charge is how do we help engage the broader population in that very important conversation? Because quite frankly, there have been extraordinary leaders that I've worked with all across the nation that are in similar positions as you are, Kathryn, leaders who have taken on this responsibility and accountability to try to help protect their communities, right? They convene a meeting and about this very serious issue, and 3 people show up, 5 people show up, 10 people show up, right? But not the entire community. And so part of the question that I've asked myself is, why is that happening? Why is that taking place? When we all know that there's not a person out there that's in the sound of my voice that hasn't in some way, shape, form, or fashion, if it's not themselves, it's their brother, their mother, their family member, their church, a fellow church member, a person that they work with. There's someone in their neighborhood or their friends who are affected by this. This issue is touching and affecting everyone. And so when I talk about changing the conversation, I'm talking about how do we collectively change the conversation so that everybody gets a sense of their own participation and responsibility towards being a part of solving and mitigating the challenges related to substance misuse. And further, not merely substance misuse, but I go further to say what we're trying to prevent is we're trying to prevent the disease of addiction from occurring without the stigma that's associated very often with those that are wrestling with it. But it is indeed a disease that we need to consider like we consider other diseases. How do we engage the full community in that conversation? Because we're never going to achieve the level of success that we would like to achieve at a population level unless we broaden this tent and we bring more folks onto this. I'll share one quick analogy and metaphor, if I could, Kathryn, just to kind of underscore what I hope folks will get as the value behind the need for prevention. I'm a recent grandfather, as you know. In the last, what is it? It'll be 4 years come April. And so I still got that new stuff. I'm still loving it to the nth degree.
I watched
It doesn't go away, does it? It doesn't go away. And so when when I go to my children's home, right, my son and his kids, or visit with my daughter and her children. In fact, my son and his wife gave my wife and I our very first grandchild on March 30th, and then 10 days later, my daughter gave birth to twins. So we went from 0 to 3, right, in 10 days. So I don't know how that works, where y'all live and work, but that's the way we kind of do it. And so it kind of took me by storm. When I go to visit them, I am struck by the fact that when I'm in their environment, in their home, I can't, for the life of me, figure out how to navigate stairs because they got some kind of great thing that's in front of the stairs. And I got 2 degrees. I'm telling you, I got 2 degrees, and I, for the life of me, can't figure out how to open up that gate thing that they got at the top of those steps. When I go downstairs and I try to look for a snack, I can't open up the cabinets because they got these things wrapped on it. So you can't get into the cabinets to get your snack. I can't plug in my phone because every outlet got some covers on top of it. You know, when I go into their home, I find that I'm not the priority in their house. The priority in their house are the most vulnerable in that environment. And it is no doubt who the priority is in their home. In a very real sense, part of what it is that I want to share with those that are listening is that what prevention is, in a nutshell, is ensuring that in the context of our environment, we are prioritizing the most vulnerable in our population and identifying where they are most vulnerable, such as the stairs or the cabinets where they might get into something, or those sockets. In our society where we have 59 million people that are working with, dealing with, trying to mitigate the harms associated with either substance misuse or mental health challenges that they have to deal with and contend with. There are a number of areas within the context of our homes, our society, that we're leaving the most vulnerable out there without protection. That's what prevention does. Prevention focuses on how we can prioritize the most vulnerable in our population. I'm sorry, I just wanted to kind of
No,
share.
you're great. And, I just want to say that, when we talk about the conversations and we talk about prevention, I almost feel that, we've had to take a backseat to COVID. And, the conversation stopped in regards to addiction and mental health. And those who work in those fields are struggling to keep that conversation going and making sure. I think that's why it was so important that we shared the information we did at the beginning of the podcast. And we'll be sharing it again at the end, because we want to make sure that that conversation includes that they're not alone. And, with Deborah, I mean, she's working directly with those individuals to make sure that they're not alone.
Absolutely. And with COVID fluctuating the way that it has, and then the guidelines and the criteria for what is deemed statewide as safe makes the people who are already made to isolate seem like they're isolating even longer, or they don't feel that they have that connection. So one problem, as you would identify it, is escalating the other problem. They already felt alone, and now you demand that they stay alone. It's hard as a therapist, in my opinion, to do everything via Zoom or telehealth. I want to see you. I want to see your reactions. You can pull yourself together for a few minutes in front of that camera, but you could be tearing your skin off where I can't see. Because you're aggravated or agitated, and we're doing them such a disservice. We need to be able to find a way, like you said, to be able to talk to them. What do you feel you need? What makes you feel better? Not what we, the establishment, think makes them feel better. They have to participate in their own life, because only they go through the struggle.
There's so much important in what you just offered, Debbie. It really underscores the real need for those of us who work in the area and the arena of prevention, and those of us who are working in the area and arena of recovery and treatment, to really come together, to really learn with and from each other, to find a way of how do we bridge the gaps that many of our people, unfortunately, are falling through. And so part of what I refer to when I talk around the nation and I talk about how do we change the conversation, I identify areas in our national conversations that that I believe are gaps, right, in the conversation, and one of those is the gaps that I would put in the category of understanding the importance of inequities and disparities, and how those issues and challenges have come to light now as a result of COVID. There are some in your audience who I'm sure are familiar with the terms social health determinants, and the social determinants of health, right? And those determinants are those conditions within our society that are actually predictive or relevant or related to the health and well-being of individuals, right? And those social determinants of health are actually aptly named because quite frankly, they someone once said, and it stuck with me because it was so relevant, so important, that through science, we've been able to determine that your zip code actually is a greater predictor of your quality of health than your genetics are. And so one of the things that we have to do as a society is, how do we deal with those issues? How do we deal with those challenges? How do we deal with the fact that while we all may be in the same storm, right, the pandemic, we aren't all in the same boat, right? there are some of us that have some boats that have some leaks in them, right? While others of us are doing quite well. This pandemic is impacting us all, but not impacting us all equally. Which brings me back to my point about the importance of the role of preventionists. We identify the most vulnerable in our population, right? And work together collectively to deal with those issues and those challenges where they're vulnerable. As you mentioned, Debbie, kind of how we know that there are folks that are being negatively impacted since the pandemic has occurred. Those who might have sought help, it was already a challenge to get some of our community members to seek help, right? And the pandemic has now come on board and really created an even bigger hurdle for them to try to get over. But knowing that that hurdle is there doesn't absolve us of the fact that we have to figure out a way of dealing with that and addressing that and doing that collectively as a society.
So here's one thing is that, and I'm going to relate a story to you. I want to get y'all's reaction on this because this blew me away. But we all know that, alcoholism's up, drug addiction or drug use is up, sexual abuse is up, sexual assault is up, or assault, or we can go down the list. There was a conversation the other day. My wife is a nurse and she works in a pediatric emergency department. And the rise in teen suicide is up. The rise in teen suicide attempts is up because of the things that we've already talked about, things you brought up, both of you have brought up, Debbie and all three of us, you guys. The comment was made to my wife. Somebody pulled some data and said, well, teen suicides are up, but successful teen suicides are down, which means that we're obviously doing something right. How are we doing something right if our teens are trying to kill themselves and luckily they don't succeed? When they don't succeed, they still tried. They made that attempt. They didn't succeed. So we're not succeeding. How do we go and help in this arena? How do we get people to understand that any suicide attempt is a sad thing?
Right. Are you ladies going first, or you want me to
For me, I say you're sending the wrong message. For you to even say, because they didn't do it successfully, we've succeeded, you're telling them to try until you get it right. So you're giving them the energy to figure out how to be successful. If I feel I failed at life, if I feel I failed in my relationship and my boyfriend or girlfriend doesn't like me anymore, if I'm being bullied at school and now I can't even kill myself, right? How does that sound? So you have to really change the conversation to make them want to live, feel worthy, feel empowered, feel loved, to say, you know what? I'm so thankful that I wasn't able to take my life. Now I'm gonna turn that around and let my life story be a lesson so that my friends won't go out and try the same thing. Because there's no guarantee that they come out of their attempt 100% correct. They could be maimed, they could be mentally challenged, they could be in an accident, they could have been and got a disability. So we want to prevent that. When I would talk with my clients, I would tell them, yeah, I'm here for you if you slip up, but I'd rather be the phone call you make before you do it in the first place.
So on that, we had this issue of COVID now. And that's the second piece of this equation in this conversation, because what causes people to go down that path again? Isolation, feeling secluded, not being able to get out, Debbie, like you said, and have that personal touch that we so badly need, having to, do Zoom calls and not do live, meetings and all that. So Carlton, what do you, go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to build on what Debbie offered and then what you shared with it as well. I think if we're talking about how do we change the conversation around that, we have to understand first and foremost that um, there is a huge challenge that already existed before COVID in terms of society and our understanding and appreciation for those that are working through and dealing with and living with mental health issues and mental health and well-being. And so those that are working through and living with that are requiring help and support and engagement that is often prevented because of the stigma that's often associated with those things, right? And how do we help our communities address the stigma that's often associated with seeking help or trying to reach out and be a part of those that are able to provide some help towards that? The data shows that more than 90% of those that are have attempted with serious mental health issues do not receive treatment or are not receiving treatment. 90% of those. There's almost 90% of those that have a substance use disorder that are not receiving treatment and treatment help and treatment support. And so the question for us is not necessarily, what does it mean when they are able to survive an attempt? I thank God that they survived the attempt, right? Thank God that they survived the attempt. It gives us an opportunity to re-engage in a way that might be able to provide the greater help and support. I place the onus and the ownership upon us as society, and I implore all of those that are listening that see themselves as being contributors to those that are trying to bring help or who are seeking help. How do we help mitigate the barriers that are associated with those from seeking that help that they need, right? And we know what some of those barriers are. Some of those are culturally specific. There's a reason why in our society, less than half of those that are actually seeking help and support are people of color, either Black or brown, right? Less than half, right? And it's not because they're not made available or accessible, but there are all kinds of issues, or not merely because they aren't available to them. Sometimes it's geographically specific, or there are reasons that way. But in many cases, there are other extenuating circumstances and issues. For example, many within communities of color have a certain distrust of helping services and systems, right, to be able to seek that help. Well, how do we overcome that? What is it that we need to do to address that? We can't do that without first engaging more folks in our conversation and helping them to understand what their role is in helping to have in our individual family settings. How do we change the conversation we have about mental health? Because being very transparent and honest. And many of the conversations that many of our families have within the African American community, there's a stigma associated with those that have substance use disorder or challenges, or those that have mental health issues that need some help and some support, right? How do we begin to change the conversations at the family level and at the individual level before we can change them at the societal level?
I want to share something that I read the other day. I was reading an article about a teacher that had been interviewed about her students and how COVID was affecting her students being online learning. And she spoke specifically of a young lady who was an athlete who got up every day and swam and, played basketball and all these different sports and was very active, was a good student and
Mhm.
making good grades and just very outgoing. And what has happened is this child was, COVID came, and no more sports.
Mhm.
That ended.
Wow.
So with that, then schoolwork started to go by the wayside. And when she was asked why, and she says, what do I have to look forward to? And I thought, that's where that conversation needs to start with our youth who are home, being, online virtually, doing these calls. These teachers are doing the best they can to engage the students, but their lives have completely changed.
Yes.
And we don't have people on the ground, or enough people on the ground, reaching out to these kids and talking to them about how they're feeling.
How they feel.
How are they dealing? How are they coping? These are kids that, may not have had mental health issues, but yet now the isolation has caused
Yes.
some of those things. So I just thought it was very interesting to see that one example. For some reason, that just hit home with me.
Okay.
And you got the phone call about an hour after I read that, Carlton.
Well,
Conversation that I think needs to be addressed and changed at this point.
I agree. I believe that COVID, the isolation and being at home to go to school has taken the zeal out of wanting to achieve, because for a lot of kids, school was their only freedom.
Yeah.
For some of them, that's the only way they ate.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way they had peace of mind. So there's so many factors that sometimes being at home with your family is the most dangerous place you can be. And you can't tell anybody because they're there and they can hear you trying to call somebody.
Yeah.
But we also, with all the electronic cell phones and these games and all of that, we've removed the art of a conversation.
Really.
And we make our children, I've watched young mothers turn on their phone and give it to their little children, go play this game versus interacting with that child. And I'm like, why'd you do that? Well, I don't have time for him right now. He can just go and entertain himself. What do you mean you don't have time for him? This is your child. But push electronics on them. We've removed the conversation. And that's part of the problem. Go figure it out yourself. Then with the different levels of school, I look at a math problem now, and I'll do the math problem with my granddaughter. I'll come up with the same answer, but if they show what grandma showed them, they'll get it wrong because they didn't like the steps I took to get there. But my thing is the right answer. So now you can't even go to your parents for help because
We learned a different way.
Yes. But I'm like, the goal is to get them the correct answer.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't help them. So now that's frustrating everybody in there. And they have no socialization.
None.
And that's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important. And to piggyback on Carlton with the African American community, we don't want to tell family history. And we would go on in this house, stay in this house. Or if uncle or aunt so-and-so had a problem, you don't talk about them.
And you bring that up, and I'll be perfectly honest, that was the same that was used in our household. You kept your family business in your house. You didn't expand out of that house, and you didn't share what they referred to as the dirty laundry.
Yes.
So I air the dirty laundry. I'm the first one to talk about my journey with children in addiction and in recovery, raising my grandchildren due to the opiate epidemic, because I want people to know that it's okay.
Absolutely.
There are others out there dealing with the same thing, and change that stigma that it's not a bad thing. I'm blessed with 3 very bright little girls.
Yeah.
I raised 4 boys and 1 girl in the first round. Now I got 3 girls. It's a whole different thing, so I have a whole different perspective, being seen through the eyes of little girls now.
Absolutely.
So, you have to just, it's all about sharing and communicating. And I don't think this, we have to figure out how to get our youth back and get them back onto that track of, reaching out. They don't have, you're sitting in a Zoom with 25 other kids. You're not going to tell your teacher that you're having issues or that
You're not going to, and you don't have, at least you could have got a hall pass and went and talked to the guidance counselor or somebody.
right.
But you can't, you don't have a guidance counselor on your Zoom.
Mm-mm.
And then you're told to figure it out. So what do? You keep a secret.
Yep.
Secrets make you sick. And it's never a secret because you had to discount yourself if you said nobody knows. So you're carrying burdens that are unnecessary for you to carry. And as children, it's like they're the trash receptacles for our life, our society, our nation, something they have no control over, but they carry all the trash from it. And then we wonder why they isolate or do a drug or want to drink or, watch things inappropriately because they're looking for an outlet. And they don't have the wherewithal to really want to be honest with mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandma, brother, sister, cousin, because now you're afraid they're going to tell on you, So we have to regain their confidence. We have abused their trust in so many different ways. We have to earn that back. And we have to do that as a community. The community has to earn the respect back of the citizens that make up the community.
So there's so much in what you all were sharing around this and kind of what occurred for me as you both were sharing your examples, which are very real, very prevalent. I'm sure many of the folks that are listening right now can relate to those stories and those issues because we all know young people that are in circumstances, we all know the situations, and we all know that this pandemic has hit and impacted us all. Part of what it is that I like to help our communities focus on, though, is that there's a lot of things we now know, right? We know by data, we know that even before the pandemic, that 9 out of 10 individuals who expressed that are living with the issues and the throes of addiction have said that they first engaged in misusing substances in their teenage years, right? So where and when were they the most vulnerable? In their teenage years. That's 9 out of 10, right? If we are going to help mitigate that issue, yes, we have to do a lot with helping folks with respect to providing treatment resources and supports for those that are already engaged, but we also have to pay attention to those who have not yet engaged and how do we prevent them from falling into those sets of behaviors in the first place? How do we set up the grate in front of the stairs that they could potentially fall down? Right? What is it that we have to focus on? And Kathryn, when you were sharing and relating the story of the young lady, what you were really doing is you were really expressing an area that we now know is a vulnerable area, is a place that needs some attention, right? And there are a number of things that we could potentially do to help ensure that that young lady and others like her will be able to be more protected than they currently are, right? There are things that we can do as a society. There are things that we can do as a society to deal with those conversations that happen within our families that Debbie talked about, right? That we know are necessary. There are things that we know we can do. The challenge, though, is do we have the will and the understanding and the drive and the full engagement of others to participate in ensuring that that happens in a way that we know that we can get some and have some success with that. I try to think about how we navigate our way through this pandemic, right? Because it is a fact that everything that we used to do is harder now. That's a fact. But I think about it like driving, right? If you're driving, you know you have a set of skills and you know how to drive. But sometimes when a heavy storm comes, we sometimes forget those skills. And we sometimes forget that the exact same skills that we developed in knowing how to drive when it's dry are absolutely essential to pay attention to. Even though it's a little harder, even though it requires much more effort and more attention, we can navigate our way through that storm in the same way. We know how to address some of the issues that you brought up. We have the science to do it. We know that in order to engage young people, we have to provide meaningful opportunities for them to be involved with stuff. We have to teach them skills that are going to be helpful in making sure that they're successful when we provide them with opportunities. Coping skills, resistance skills, communication skills, life skills. We know these things. And then when they've shown that they've had some success at those skills, we know we need to provide them with recognition that's meaningful to them. That's the social development strategy, right? And before Doctors Hawkins and Catalano codified that into a research project, that's what my grandma used to use too, right? And so we know that when you provide opportunity, skills, and recognition, that produces bonding. That produces an opportunity to bound them to a caring adult, to someone that is providing clear standards and healthy beliefs for them to navigate even during a pandemic. Yes, it's going to be harder now, but we know what we have to do. We just have to put more effort behind ensuring that it gets done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it takes us all coming together, right? It takes us all just pulling together our resources and having the conversation like this one, having the conversation.
And being intentional about it, right? And so the thing that you're doing, Debbie, with the organization that you run and support, and the thing that I know Kathryn is doing from her position, right? The thing that you're doing, Matt, through the vehicle of Convene, right, is working towards engaging others and introducing to others their relationship to the issues and the challenges and the priorities that we bring up, right? And the first step that we have to do is bring up and raise the awareness that there is a role for them. There is a role that they can play in helping to mitigate these issues and these challenges. And we can't be reactive to it. We have to be proactive. We have to be intentional about how we do this.
Yeah, I think you have to look at on a macro level, right? We tend to be micro, but I would say that's one of the positives of COVID that has come out for me. I can speak specifically for me, but let's just look at this panel right here. Like if it wasn't for COVID, we probably wouldn't be on here right now. Amy down in Florida probably wouldn't be watching right now. Right. So there is some very positives. We focus on the negative, but there's some positives, and we need to look at this in a macro level. Right. Of how we can come together and take care of these issues across the country. And that's one of the things I love about doing this with Kathryn and Debbie is, yeah, they could focus on their county, they could focus where they are, but that's not what they're doing. They're focusing on how they can get this message out across the country. And that's so key that we come together.
And taking their passion, their issues, their leadership, their skills, their tools, their resources, and adding that to your skills and your technical expertise to be able to allow that conversation to happen. So as our young people are having to deal a lot more online and dealing with the issue that Kathryn, you brought up with the young lady, there are now those folks that now are getting better at creating engagement and engagement opportunities, through the use of technology. We're getting better at trying to reach out to those folks to involve them, engage them in treatment efforts now, right? Because we've been forced to. The pandemic forced us to get better at it. We're still not there yet, but we're working towards it.
Yeah. Ladies, anybody?
This was a very good conversation, and I'm glad that we talked about this today. And as we continue to focus on this and grow, we need to solicit mentors. We have no mentors and role models anymore. So if we could get people to just give an hour of their time, maybe we could get a group together where you can mentor them in what you do and be able to listen to them and maybe empower or inspire them. And it only took an hour of your time. You can't maybe go visit anybody, but you could allow us to let you be Zoomed with a group of kids or a group of interested individuals just to hear a success story. And that will be that spark to say we could do it too. And every time we have a success story, let's acknowledge that. If we went in the media and even on social media and highlighted positive things and success stories versus everything in the world that somebody could have got embarrassed, hurt, killed, beat up, to change the conversation instead of, did you see so-and-so get embarrassed? Hey, did you see so-and-so get a diploma? You know what I'm saying? We have to create the conversation that we want to be spoken.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, that's good.
And you all are doing and providing such a remarkable service. By not making sure that by not merely having the conversations that you have within your county, but ensuring that these are conversations that can be had and be introduced nationally, right? Through this. And one of the things that I wanted to offer and offer to your community and your listeners to think about and consider is that you're not alone, right? Folks that are out there that are working through these issues, working through these challenges, even those of you that are working towards helping to address these challenges, right? We sometimes feel like we're out here by ourselves, kind of working this thing, right? We're not alone. One of the great joys that I have is I work with community coalitions. These are gatherings and collections of caring folks across the country. In almost every community across the country, you have some local coalition that has decided to come together to prioritize the issues and the challenges and the concerns of their communities to address this. There is an important federal funding grant that provides support to community coalitions across the nation. It's called the Drug-Free Community Support Program, or DFC. If your listeners look up drug-free communities or drug-free community or DFC, they will find the information that is being provided through the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy that enables them to participate in that, where they can become involved. If you're looking for help and resources and support to those of you that are trying to address this, you don't have to do it by yourselves. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, has provided and funded these remarkable institutions of technical support and help and services called technology transfer centers. And there are different kinds. There's a prevention technology transfer center, right? These are organizations. Many of them are overseen by some of the universities across the nation, but there are 13 of them. There are 10 for each of the 10 regions, SAMHSA regions across the nation. And so each one is responsible for certain states. For those of you that are in Ohio, you have a prevention technology transfer center that is just yours, that you can have access to. And guess what? Guess how much it costs to get and ask for help from them? Absolutely nothing. It is free for you, right? There's a mental health technology transfer center, right? For those of you who are interested in the issues of suicidality and other issues and challenges, right? And there are the addiction technology transfer centers. These technology transfer centers across the nation, all you have to do is you can Google them, ATTCs or MHTTCs or PTTCs. You know, in Washington, we love our acronyms, right? But look up technology transfer centers, and you'll be able to have access to a whole host of resources that you can avail yourselves that are absolutely free. Much of it is downloadable, and you'll be able to find the kind of help and the kind of support that you need. We have some opportunity of working with many of them across the nation, and so I just wanted to make sure that I put in a plug for them.
So we're coming up towards the end of towards 9 o'clock. And so let's, Deborah, you have a couple words, and then we'll go to Kathryn, and Kathryn, you can put out the numbers again and close out. And then Carlton, we'll go to Carlton, and he can finish us off. How about that?
Sounds great. You know, Carlton, I want to just thank you for coming on and sharing this vital information with us, helping us to connect even further. I want the community and the listeners and the people to know that we are here for them and that your life is so important. And you are worth every ounce of energy that we put out so that you can continue to have that life and be the best you that you can be. So that's why I named it, It Takes a Life to Save a Life. So I'll begin by offering you mine, Kathryn.
So, Carlton, my friend, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for saying yes when I called and asked that question of, hey, what are you doing? And so the numbers I want to send out tonight is 1-800-273-8255. You're not alone. You can also text for hope to 741-741. Again, you can always reach out to any of us on this podcast by, Facebook, Convene Communities, our personal Facebook pages. You have our names. You are not alone. We will connect you with the resources that you need to get that help. I do want to take a brief moment before I turn it back over to Carlton. Next month, we will be looking at victim advocacy, and we have a great lineup. We're a little partial to these ladies because they are the ladies that advocate for our victims here in Ashtabula County. So we have Teresa Stanford, who will be joining us. She is with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. We have Shawnee McLaughlin, Stephanie Titus, and Hallie Dunbar, who are legal and family advocates for our local domestic violence shelter. They are our legal advocates for our victims here. So as you can see, we have an all-star lineup for victim advocacy, and we hope that everybody joins us next month to hear what they have and are doing for our victims in the community. Again, thank you to all our listeners. Thank you, Matthew. We appreciate everything that you do for us here to get us out there and get the message out. And I'll turn it over to Carlton now.
Well, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. Matt, thank you for everything. Debbie, thank you so very, very much for all the work that you do and the leadership that you provide. I really appreciate our being able to have this conversation with each other, and looking forward to many more. Kathryn, forgive me, Commissioner. Again, and also to have the opportunity of thinking about these very important things with you. I want to share that a great resource there in the country for those of you who are interested in knowing what you can do more about substance misuse is the Drug Free America Foundation. Drug Free America Foundation. You can look them up as well. Their executive director, Amy Ronshausen, who has been, I think, listening to some of the
She has.
today, was on board and cares desperately about these issues. Thank you all for everything that you do, wherever you're doing it. We're doing this together. Our communities need us right now. And so it's been the privilege that I have with my company to reach out and engage with those of you who care as passionately about trying to address these issues as I do. And so I thank you for what you're doing wherever you're doing it. And if we can be of any help and any support, please reach out to us. God bless you all.
So thank you, Carlton, for coming on. Thanks, Kathryn and Debbie, again for tonight. We have put carltonhallconsulting.com is in the chat or in the feed. It takes a life to save a life.org is in the feed, and drugfreeamericafoundation.org is in the feed as well. So you can always find us on the third Tuesday of every night. Really looking forward to the next one. You can find us on Convene Communities as well. Again, Carlton, thank you. This wasn't our first interview. That's why we're all coming back together, right? So this is one big happy family, and love you guys, and really appreciate everything that each of you are doing out there in the community, because you're making such a difference, and we all have to come together. We got to change the conversation, and life is the new cool. So y'all have a great night.
Thank you.
Have a great
Folks, all right, take care.